So I want to continue on with mentioning about the whole notion of buyer personas that we were talking about last time. And I was going through everything. I kind of recognized that as I was going through and talking about these particular variables, one of the things that slipped my mind was, it might be helpful if I give you some information about psychographics and psychographic information. So if you're not familiar with this, I can give you a little bit of a guide that really might help you in terms of creating those buyer personas. So they do kind of come with a small description on each of those, and I'm going to run over 8 of them today, just as kind of a good starting point for what you might be looking for in this case. So, I do want to mention a couple things before we get started here. And then first and foremost is these descriptions are not inherently going to be a set standard. We can always move up in innovation. We can always move up in resources or vice versa. I also want to indicate that one is not better than the other. There is a couple of them that have more or higher resources, for instance. So, and resources in this case might be financial gain. So, people who might have a little bit more money than some other people do. That does not inherently or any kind of way make anybody better in this case. So, it kind of reads that way in sometimes, but I do want to make that very clear in the context of everything as I'm going over these. So, and lastly, I'll mention when we go over vowels, one person doesn't inherently stay in one category all the time, and they're not justifiably in that category by itself. So you might have a psychographic that you're pulling from that falls in 2 separate ones, for instance. And so, like I said, this will help out a little bit in terms of bringing this into fruition and maybe helping you understand the process when we're getting buyer personas a little bit more. So again, this is the goal for this week, to be able to understand that. So as Vals works out, the original Vals starts to look at a framework based on resources and innovation. So resources in this case can be something, again, I've mentioned financial sense can be considered resources, but you might have more property, you may have you may just have more in terms of things you can work with than other people do. And so this is important to remember, because selling something to a person with higher resources versus lower resources, you're probably going to be sending a much different message, even if the product's the same. It may be a different reason. A person with lower resources might look at coffee and say it's very functional, whereas a person with higher resources may look at it as an identity standpoint, or vice versa. I mean, again, it just really depends on the person. So, again, I'm going to try to make it so I'm not labeling anybody in this case, but again, just how the psychographic chart works. So, resource is one of them. The other one is innovation, and innovation has this declaration of what do you try to do with the resources that you have. Or are you a person that likes to go shopping, likes to go hunting for bargains, or are you a person that you just go in, buy what you need, and then that's it? Some people buy a car for extravagance purposes. They view heavily on the options. They're wanting to work on them constantly. And other people will say, hey, if it gets me to point A to point B, gets pretty good gas mileage, I'm happy. So again, that's that resources innovations. And Vals in particular, in its framework, has a high resources innovation and a low research and innovation. So again, we'll go over some of the areas that refer to these. And I start towards that low resources and innovation with your survivors, believers, strivers, and makers. Those are all kind of in this low source, low innovation category. So I'll mention those first. When we get into high resources and high innovation, you have thinkers, achievers, experiencers, and innovators. That's kind of the highest bracket, if you will, is the innovator category. So let's start with, as we're going through this, let's go through survivors first. And survivors in this case live very focused lives. They don't have a whole lot of resources. In many ways, they don't feel as powerful as they could be, but they have this urge to feel safe. So if you are looking, let's say, I don't know if you are all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's pretty standard when you're getting into college educated classes. So that's kind of the lowest point of that pyramid, to where he says, first and foremost, before I have any self-actualization, before I have any social needs, before I have anything, I just want to feel safe. And so this is an important consideration to think about when you're looking at survivors, for instance, is this need to feel safe. They're very brand loyal. So anytime that you're selling something to a survivor, it really needs to be something that's going to get the most mileage, if you will. So these the people who kind of fall under this category typically want something's going to last a very long time. It's dependable. It may be inexpensive. Sorry, my phone went off. And in which case they're going to look for discounts. So if you're an advertiser, this is kind of where coupons work really well for survivors. They might also look into the sense of, again, point of purchase or POP ads. Again, everything that's right there. And again, these discounts make a big to-do about this. This is one of the reasons why Black Friday is so popular, because, again, it is a reliable product, and it's something that you can purchase for relatively inexpensive at the time. And so some examples, and this might be a Dollar General, for instance, maybe your Walmarts, etc. Again, something that is relatively inexpensive in this case. And again, some people, and this is something to really consider, is the area of survivors. Usually it has low resources, but there are plenty of people that have a lot of resources that act in this category of survivors, that the reason that they have a lot of resources is because they pinched pennies the entire time, and that's the way they're persuaded, is through that particular area of, again, most mileage as well as inexpensive price for that what we're doing. So again, that's kind of the area for low resource and some low innovation. As we kind of move up a little bit, we go through makers. So this is usually indicative of the Midwest per se. I know living in North Dakota for 4 years, it was very much in this area. And granted, they had a mixed population, but makers were very practical, very self-sufficient. They don't like help a lot. They're very work-oriented. They're very hands-on. They're very family-oriented. And so, again, one of the things that I often mention when it comes to teaching in a university setting is every university kind of has its unique mentality when it comes to the culture. And this is important because, again, with different universities, I would often experience different state of minds. North Dakota, for instance, were really in that maker's perspective, where you didn't get a lot of flair, if you will. A lot of them didn't take a lot of time telling jokes or spending money in frivolous ways, but they were extremely hard workers. So if I told them to do something, it got done. And I didn't really have to tell them to do a lot with it, or I didn't have to hold their hand a lot when it came to that kind of stuff. Again, they were very self-sufficient in this case. And so you see things like Fleet Farms, your Lowe's Hardware, Home Depot kind of places. Again, relatively inexpensive, but at the same time, we have this area of, again, if it works, we're going to use it. And so again, think of your farmers in this case. Think of people who are very industrial. in terms of this maker category. So let's see here. Next one is through strivers. Now, strivers is really interesting because when we look at strivers, it's part of this low resources and low innovation, but strivers in many cases has some interesting ways of innovation. You can usually look at strivers as your college kids, and your stereotypical college kids. They're very trendy. They like to have fun. They don't have much money, and that's one of the characteristics. But they're very stylish. So, you look at a lot of universities in the South, for instance. You see many students again dressing up and making good use of the choices that they have. And again, this is part of that low resources. But again, we're promoting this idea of kind of feeling like we're going to get the best bang out of our buck. Again, we're going to make it so that it's very trendy. So, places like this could be Kohl's, TJ Maxx, Home Goods, people shopping on eBay. These are all examples that we could promote here. TJ Maxx is probably one of my favorites on there because, again, you don't have to have a lot of money to go to TJ Maxx. And they always have, if you're working hard enough at it, there's usually something really cool in there that's relatively inexpensive that would go really well with whatever you're trying to do. But again, these are people that are very trendy in this case. So these are your strivers, again. So that's one of the last ones. The last one on kind of that low resource, low innovation are your believers. And this is usually indicative of the Southeast for the most part, which is strongly traditional. They respect rules quite a lot. They're very conservative. They're very brand loyal. And again, these are a kind of area of if you are selling a quality product and you're pushing them in that direction and they like the product that they're getting out of this, they will remain loyal in this case because of those set standard of rules, because of that tradition. They value that. So, in many ways, my parents have a certain automobile that they like to drive. And so they might promote that brand to me to say, look, Stephen, this is the car you need to drive because, this is what we've been driving for years. And again, these can be, if you're, a Ford or Chevy person, these can be Levi's jeans, for instance. This is a good example. I know people in the South drive to Cracker Barrel all the time on their road trips. And again, it is a very traditional. My parents, for instance, anytime we went on a road trip, they were like, that's the place we go to. Again, it was almost ubiquitous, or excuse me, not ubiquitous, sorry. It's almost axiomatic that we would go to that place. We would go to Cracker Barrel, or, you would go to like a Walmart or something. It could also be part of it. So again, very traditional, very brand loyal, and it's respecting of these particular rules. And so think about these Vals targets and think about how you might establish yourself. So if you are pitching to a believer, for instance, maybe the idea is to say, we've been your partner for XYZ amount of years. Establishing that bond and relationship that you've had with your consumers. Whereas strivers, for instance, you might have certain sales that, again, things that look really good. You might use social media to a T. Some of you have mentioned, I'm going to go back to believers, some of you have mentioned that there are many people in your area that don't use social media or really can't stand the prospect of it. And this may be the kind of area where, because of that, they may stick with some of those older marketing techniques like the Yellow Pages newspapers, again, coupons, etc. So, again, really think about these people in terms of how you are selling to them. And that can make a significant difference because each one of these, I can already tell you, will have a different marketing strategy. And within buyer personas, you can have a person within one of these categories here. that explains, kind of what's going on. And I'm hoping I'm giving you just some descriptors to help with that. The next is we're actually going to move up a little bit in terms of your high resources and high innovations. So one of the first ones I want to start off with are experiencers. These are your outdoor customers. These are people who love to travel. They're very unconventional. They're very impulsive. They're active. They take a lot of risks, but they have resources. So one thing that kind of have confused some of my students in the past was this area of having an experiencer versus a striver. And strivers usually don't have those resources to be able to spend. It'd be nice for myself to go around the world and post pictures. And I have one friend in particular. He works in Lyon, France, and he travels the world. And he's been traveling the world. And he's written a book about surfing in China. What was the one thing he mentioned? He was one of the first Westerners to potentially become a monk at a monastery, which was incredible. But again, that's, I consider, if I'm like labeling myself here, I consider myself somewhat of an experiencer. Within reason. I don't know if I have the resources to do a lot of things. But I mean, some good examples are a lot of ski companies, for instance, Salomon, Rossignol, K2, North Face. I wear Birkenstocks, for example. Teva might be another brand. People who drive Jeeps around here. You recognize that many people around here in Boone in particular, especially our student population, are kind of in that strivers and experiencers category. And that would just be an area to look at. So, then you have your achievers, They're very goal-oriented, usually, typically, kind of your white collar. They're very achievement-oriented. I know I mentioned goal, but very achievement-oriented in terms of going for what they want. In terms of, again, if we're climbing that Maslow's a little bit, in terms of social status, they really care about how they're dressed. They really care about their appearance. They like change. So when things kind of start moving in different directions, they move with it too. And they're very status conscious. So, if you think of you're kind of keeping up with the Joneses type of family, this is kind of where it stems from, is in this achievers. And you may see this with things like Lacoste, J. Crew, BMW, Coach, a lot of the computer products. I mean, Apple could be an example of one, or PC, depending on how you look at it. But again, these achievers are very much so, and I like the idea of status-oriented to help describe them. Really helps out with this case. And the next one is one that I kind of fall under again, which, well, maybe I'm getting a little pretentious as well as overly ambitious by saying that I'm a thinker. And a lot of thinkers are very comfortable in their surroundings, or they desire comfort. They're very satisfied. They like to reflect. So if you, again, look at the James Potter article, I know I'm beating that one to death. They really see things in an introspective look. They're very analytical. They're very well educated. They seek out information. These are the people who love going on Amazon and looking through the reviews constantly. They compare prices quite a lot, and they really just want the best bang for their buck in their own way. Again, as long as it brings them comfort and really gets them into that frame of mind when it comes to status, when it comes to functionality. So like I said, Starbucks is one of those examples of you're get a bunch of academics in a conference. They're going to be lined up through Starbucks. You might look at smart cars, for instance. Not that Prius is a smart car, but I know a lot of academics that drive Priuses, or maybe save up for a Tesla or something like that. I know a lot of academics that swear by Max, for instance. They go to Barnes and Noble all the time. Again, these are the kind of areas within thinkers. So that's kind of one of the last ones within high resources, high innovation. Now, the highest one for this one in particular are your innovators. They're extremely successful. They convey the perception of sophistication. They like extremely nice things. They are very status oriented as well. They have very high self-esteem. They have new ideas and technology. They love change. It's almost like if you were to take an achiever and bump them up a little bit in terms of, again, not only resources, but that innovation. They want to keep moving forward, and they want to be the ones to do it. So, when going over some brands of this one, I was like, here are things that I will never have. So, I won't stay at the Ritz-Carlton too much. I won't drive a Maserati. I won't ever purchase a Carver yacht or have anything Imperial Armani or anything like that. These are very luxurious products. And interestingly enough, I can't remember if it was on Netflix or Hulu or, but it was a movie talking about people purchasing $100,000 bottles of wine, and that was kind of their hobby, if you will. And, you and I might sit here and say, what a colossal waste of money. But again, if you're kind of in that market, you know that price is no objection for the most part when it comes to innovators, as long as it functions in the way that gives them a good status. If it's something new and exciting, innovators really like this a lot. And these may be kind of the areas that you're looking for within high resources. And I doubt that many people would pick a product. I don't think, while going over the list the last few days, I don't think I really saw any that would really communicate the idea of innovators per se. But I definitely saw people choose stuff for thinkers. I definitely saw people pick things for experiencers, achievers. And again, the main focus I want y'all to think about when you're coming up with your buyer personas is, how can I create a entity or a prototype within those categories? This kind of helps you get started in not only understanding what those buyer personas might look like, but again, also give you the words to start off with. Because again, demographics are only going to tell you so much, but the psychographics can actually help you a little bit in terms of coming up with those descriptors to be able to help out. And again, the Snapple case study, the Harley-Davidson case study is there to help you. Now, I will mention, just as a quick note, there's a few of the ones from Snapple I'm not, 100% on board with. I feel like the students who promoted this one could have done a better job on one or two of them, so this is kind of a small disclaimer. However, they came up with a lot of them, and that was something that I was really happy about when we were going over this project. And it helps us kind of understand a little bit more who we're selling to in this case. So, and another reason I chose Snapple is that we do have some information that, let's say you wanted to work with the NSAC client, for instance, and if you ever wanted to be on the NSAC team, it's kind of a good thing to get some practice in looking at our potential client this year. So again, not that you can use it this year, just because NSAC is very protective of their clients and we don't want to intrude on them, but it does make it real interesting in terms of the breadth that can be placed with this. So again, just think about these as we kind of go along here. The last thing I'll mention, again, is the notion of creating multiple profiles with these particular people. And it may be hard when you sit there and say, I don't know all of my customers that come in, but if you work in the organization, you do know your customers. You do know some of the commonalities that you see as people come in. But if you're not familiar, you also might sit there and say, who is your stereotypical or prototypical Starbucks drinker, for instance, and that may be really important to look at, if you're hypothetically doing Starbucks and so forth. So, like I said, those are kind of the main things that I wanted to cover over today, especially when it comes to Vals and psychographic research. And so, again, start with your demographics and then just kind of narrow down from there, as I mentioned with a little board up here, because your population is going to be more so your demographic. As your sample comes in, that's your psychographic, and all the little dot points are potential people to access that prototype. So start big, aim small, and that's one of the best ways you can get your buyer persona, and one of the easiest ways to do it. So like I said, consult the case studies, email me if you have any questions, and I hope you all have a great day. Stay dry, and like I said, I hope you all are safe. Let me know if you have any issues or anything, and like I said, we'll make sure to accommodate for us. So you all have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.